All right, we are getting closer and closer to Super Bowl 58, getting ready for the big matchup between the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. And so, whipped up a little fun episode here where we're going to discuss our top 10 players, ranking them 1 through 10. Mark and I have not seen each other's list, so this will be interesting to
No.
see how they shake out. I'm sure there will be quite a bit of overlap, as you know, there are obvious stars playing in both of these games, but I'm sure on the back, 5 or so, things will start to get a little interesting to see how we kind of parse through and what our, criteria is for how we judge some of these candidates for the top 10 players. And then also coming up later on in the show, we'll do some Super Bowl trivia. Is it going to revolve around the matchup specifically, some players, or is it going to be more general Super Bowl trivia? Well, we'll find out because we both picked our own questions for each other. So, looking forward to that. Here we go. Our top 10 players of Super Bowl 58. All right, wasting no time, we'll get things started here with our lists. Mark and I think the best way to kind of go about this is each give our 10 through 6.
Yeah.
We'll alternate there, and then we'll discuss, and then go into our top 5 players. So, Mark, I will give you the floor to kick things off with your number 10 best player in this Super Bowl matchup.
I will start it off, and before I jump into it, I do want to quickly say, I think the thing that really surprised me was, we talked all season how the Niners have like the most dudes, right? They're the roster where it's just absolutely loaded with guys. You can sit there, drink a beer with your buddies, and be like just naming dudes from the Niners roster.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to the top end talent, I was surprised how many Kansas City Chiefs I found myself wanting to put in this list. So that's just a little preamble to getting it started here. So I'm just going 10 through 6 right off the bat here.
Yeah, rattle
All
them
right.
off, and then we'll discuss.
So at number 10, I have the center for the Kansas City Chiefs, Creed Humphrey. He is a dude that has quickly become one of the premier offensive linemen in the NFL. And when you are now in a league that is, center, well, growing up, center was kind of that position where it's like you put the smart, undersized offensive lineman who's kind of the leader. You just put him at center. And as the game has evolved, it becomes so much more important to have that starting left tackle to protect the blind side. It became more of a passing league. Slowly, the center is really becoming, in my opinion, the second most important position on the offensive line behind that left tackle because of how much of a passing league it is, calling out, blitz packages, calling out where the linebackers are, and having a center who has a really consistent, good shotgun snap. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. Creed Humphrey is a real baller, and he's been a great addition to Kansas City over the last couple of years. One of the things that I think makes this offensive line overall better than the offensive line when the Chiefs played the Niners in the 2020 Super Bowl. Number 9, Fred Warner, linebacker, San Francisco 49ers. Listen, he's an all-world talent. He's fantastic. He's one of those guys I was struggling. I get to number 9. I'm like, he should be higher, it feels like. So I wouldn't hold it against you if he was. But, again, I think as the game changes, the linebacker position has changed a little bit too. He's also not in his peak prime anymore. But he still is one of the best in football. So I have him at number 9. This one hurt that this person was so low. But again, there's just a lot of talented people in this game. Deebo Samuel coming in at number 8.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Deebo is, to me, probably a guaranteed top 5 weapon in the NFL. You can make the argument he's the second most valuable weapon in the NFL behind the guy in his team, Christian McCaffrey. I mean, you look at these, Jahmyr Gibbs has become a premier weapon. You look at
Tyreek Hill, probably.
Tyreek Hill is a premier weapon. I look at a guy like Alvin Kamara is a premier, weapon. You can make the argument Taysom Hill is a really unique and premier weapon. But Deebo Samuel, he is really, really special. And what he does in this offense makes him so hard to stop. Wanted him to be higher, but again, I just I value some of these other positions more and these people more. Even though the Niners were winless without Deebo Samuel in the starting lineup, so it just goes to show you his value as well. George Kittle at number 7. Kittle is one of those names that you forget was actually a part of that Niners Super Bowl when they lost to the Chiefs back in 2020. He's a guy that's been around the league now a while, and he's a guy that when he is healthy is a throwback style of tight end. He is the perfect like 80s, 90s tight end who also has the modern skills. Travis Kelce is the 2024 like modern era tight end. He's like peak what you want, right?
Yeah, George
Elite.
Kittle's like Jeremy Shockey, you know.
Jeremy, he is. He is a physical, but he has the ability to still be extremely effective in the modern passing game of the NFL. But his block on Aiden Hutchinson, did you see that block go viral?
Yes.
The dude is without a doubt. He's more Gronk than Travis Kelce, obviously. Yeah. And he is that throwback Mike Ditka style tight end, but in the modern game, and he's fun to watch. Number 7, Chris Jones at number 6. I can make the argument that Chris Jones is actually the most important defensive player going into this game. Chris Jones, I think, is not, again, he's like Warner. I struggled a little bit because it's like, it feels like his game is lost a step or to his absolute peak about 2 years ago. But Chris Jones is still a monster, a game wrecker. And what I respect so much about Chris Jones is he can make a play really early in the game, and you may not hear his name called, but if you go back and watch all 22 and then you see him show up late in the fourth quarter, he's a dude that has a really incredible, like, I don't know if it's conditioning or I don't know if it's just God-given, like, late in the fourth quarter when offensive lines are tired and everyone else is tired, his motor still works at like 110%. And Chris Jones is always that guy sometime in the fourth quarter or in overtime where it's like, there he goes. He makes the play when they absolutely need him most, whether it's simply getting an arm up and batting a ball down. He's a stud. He's a freak. He's at number 6. So in my 10 through 6 spot, 2 Kansas City Chiefs and 3 San Francisco 49ers.
Well, we have the exact same players represented in the bottom 5, so that's pretty.
Let's go.
I'm actually a little surprised.
Can't argue about that at all.
Yeah, no, not at all. And we have a couple, that are spot on. So I also have Creed Humphrey at number 10 for me too. He was obviously being 10 was the bubble guy, and we'll discuss kind of maybe what players were being thought about at this spot once we finish the list, but. Yeah, I mean, he's just in year 3, Mark, and for him to already be an all-pro at his position, it's really impressive. I mean, you mentioned, like, center is a very difficult position to transition to from college. You are the quarterback of the offensive line. You have to know every position. You have to make the calls. You have to, recover. You have to snap the ball and block. I mean, that's just alone is a little bit more taxing than a guard or some, a tackle. And so, yeah, I mean, he's just right out of the gates was a prominent NFL rookie, and now in year 3 has established himself as top 3 centers in all of football. And if Jason Kelce retires, he might be number 1. So very impressed with how he's played. George Kittle comes in at number 9 for me. And part of the thing with George Kittle is that if some of his best games that he's put out there was a lot more representative of his entire body of work, he'd probably be talked about as Gronk in terms of like the greatest of all time at the position. But George has had, he's had his injuries, but aside from that, there's just been inconsistencies, and whether or not that's all his fault is,
there was a lot of CJ Beathard years, you know what I mean? Some Nick Mullins, he's had quarterback issues in his career as a tight end. I'm with you there.
Yeah, and he just, he hasn't had the overall target share that's, Travis Kelce and some of these other guys have had, but he's one of the best, if not the best yak guy in the NFL at the tight end position. And so he's definitely a prominent player. And you mentioned, I mean, his blocking's incredible. So it kind of hurt to put him at 9 because he is so, formidable and one of the best at his position in the league. But there's a lot of good players in this game, and so, we're not too far behind. I have Fred Warner at 8. You had him at 9, so we're not too far off on that one. But I just value, what he brings to the table at the inside linebacker position, a position that's been more and more strained as the years have gone on, because it's just, Brian Urlacher and Luke Kuechly were ahead of their time in some ways, but also kind of set the tone for what the next generation of
Yeah.
linebackers is going to require. If you're a linebacker nowadays, an inside linebacker, obviously
You got to
depending on
cover.
the team, but more often than not, you have to be a Brian Urlacher. You have to be a Luke Kuechly.
Urlacher, you're absolutely right. If Urlacher was drafted tomorrow, like this year,
he would fit great.
He may go down as the greatest linebacker of all time, because he's one of those guys that Ray Lewis was more fit for his era and like the 90s football, where Urlacher, I think history will look kindly on Urlacher being able to, like, Ray Lewis in today's game is not nearly as valuable as Brian Urlacher.
Yeah, I mean you're in base all the time back in Ray Lewis's days. You're in the 4-3,
and you could hit
all
over the middle.
day.
You could knock dudes out over the middle. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yep. And then moving to number 7, that's where I have Chris Jones here. So
okay,
you mentioned the age and kind of the wear and tear. He's not as dominant as he used to be, but he's still very much dominant. So maybe that dropped him a little bit here on this list. Just the fact that, he's not maybe as down to down amazing as he used to be, but he's still obviously a force to be reckoned with. And his just raw ability to have the balance and core strength that he has at that position makes it, I mean, he's literally an immovable object. I mean, that's why like him and Cam Hayward and Aaron Donald are like in that grouping year after year, because they're so freaking strong that you just can't move them. And so that's what makes him valuable, is that he's not just a pass rushing specialist. He's not just a run stuffer that just takes on double teams. He's a guy that you have to worry about in any type of situation, because he could come after the quarterback, or he could take on the double team and still get that tackle for loss. So he's just incredible. But a lot of other players may be closer to their prime and more impactful overall on this list. And then Debo comes in at 6 for me. I mean, what you said about his, being one of the top playmakers, I think he is number one in terms of like a Swiss Army knife type of player in the league. I truly believe that because, he's shown that he can break off a 60-yard touchdown run, and he can line up in the backfield out of I formation and still perform well. But he can be an outside receiver. He can be a slot guy. And he can block too. I mean, he really is the jack of all trades. But instead of master of none, which is the second part of that phrase, he's also a master of all of those too. I mean, he really is among the best slot receivers, among the best outside receivers, among the best, physical runners in the league. And so I mean, you got to value what the guy can bring on a down-to-down basis. And so he comes in at number 6 for me to round that out. So yeah, same group of players we have, just a slight shuffling of the order. But I like
and Debo, people forget, like Debo also, I was just looking it up here too when you're talking about him. I mean, he had games of 116 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7 receptions, 149 yards, a touchdown. Like, he's a real receiving threat as well. Like, I mean, he is a bona fide number 1 receiver. If you just ever line him up as a wide receiver, he could be a top 5 running back in the NFL if you just line him up as a running back. So he is, I mean, very, very special player. I will say this before we move on. I will now be very shocked if we don't have the same 5 in the top 5. Because this to me is so obvious, the top 5. I'll be pretty surprised. All right, so I'll jump into it, shall we?
So should we alternate now 5 and 5, 4 and 4?
Sure, why not?
Kind of go down the list that way?
Let's do that.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right, give me your 5 here.
Nick Bosa, number 5. Nick Bosa is just a freak. He is a dude that is an absolute game wrecker, and he's the type of player in this game when you start to look at it, you say he was a pup back in 2000 when 2020 when they played. Like 4 years ago, he was an absolute pup. And I think this is the type of game where you look at and you say, like, this dude could end up being the MVP of the game. Like, he's that good. He's that explosive. I'm not saying he will, but he's the type of defensive player where you say to yourself, would it shock you if Bosa finds a way to get 3 sacks, a strip sack fumble recovery, 2 quarterback hurries or whatever, a tip ball or an interception, and it's like he's the reason the Niners are walking away with the Super Bowl title for the first time since the early 90s. It wouldn't shock me at all. He can be that kind of game wrecker. I worry about Nick Bosa over an 18-game season the way I'm going to start worrying about like TJ Watt. Some of these guys, when you look at just their physical build, they start to remind you almost like of a Joel Embiid, where you're like, the human body is not supposed to look like that. Like, no
like
wonder
how fluid they work, and
wonder you're getting these nagging soft tissue issues. Like, you're pushing your body to physically, like, it's absolute peak, and that's what Bosa is, and that's what Bosa does. And he's a game wrecker. So I have him at 5. Wanted him to be higher, but the 4 people ahead of him to me are they all look like first ballot Hall of Famers. I just don't know if Nick's there yet.
Nick Bosa was the one player that I was shocked at when I was making this list because of where I thought he would fall to where he actually did fall, and he fell at number 5 for me as well.
Look at that.
I thought initially thinking, I was like, oh,
co-hosts.
he'll probably be number 2. I know we clearly.
Most people want to build a show on like yin and yang. We build our show on yin and yang.
We just exactly. we're rebranding to the yin yang show with Mark and Dan.
The yin yang show.
No,
sponsored by Yingling Beer.
Oh yes, very good. Okay,
we'll do it, Yingling. Hit us up, Yingling.
In.
It's in Missouri now.
Yeah.
I can have one with me every time we do the show.
Hey, we serve Yingling in the football lounge, no question. We've got a lot of alcoholic beverages available, but Yingling is one of the tops. But yeah, Nick Bosa is one of those guys that can wreck a game, but he's also a guy that can, if you like, I'm trying to say this without like disparaging him as a player. I just think he's a guy that you can game plan against.
Yeah.
And for that reason, like there are some guys you can't really avoid Chris Jones. He's in the middle of the line, you can't avoid Aaron Donald very much. Certain edge rushers are really good at maybe this is biased. TJ Watt is one of the best when you're running away from him, because he's so fast around the edge that you can't, and not to say that Nick Bosa isn't, he's obviously one of the best to do it at his position, but just saying the way they play defense and his position as like a true defensive end versus an edge rusher in a 3-4. He's a guy that maybe you could make a little bit more quiet. And so maybe it's unfair to put him at 5 for that reason, because that has nothing to do with his capabilities as a player. But there's I could see the 3 sacks, the strip sack, the interception. I could also see 2 quarterback hurries, 1 tackle at the end of this game too, and that's where it's like, okay,
well, you make a good point.
Yeah,
well, he's in a tough spot too, because ever since they picked up Chase Young, while Chase Young has helped them rush the passer, teams run at Chase. They run at Chase Young, which means you're going opposite of Bosa a ton. And so you're absolutely right. Just because he has a quiet stat day doesn't mean he's not a monster and he's not one of the best players in the NFL and one of the best players in the biggest game.
And he's one of those guys that can get 5 pressures in a game. And, that doesn't often show up on the typical box score. But a pressure is just as valuable oftentimes as a sack because of the consistency in it. It forces Aaron throws and maybe forces a pick. So,
you're going to need a guy like Bosa to be at his best because Mahomes is so slippery. I mean, we watched it against the Ravens.
He might be the X factor for the 49ers in this game.
Yeah, I mean, Mahomes, right. If you can get Mahomes to the ground, once you get a hand on him, kudos to you, because not a lot of guys can do that. Number 4 for me, to me, he's the best offensive lineman in this game. He's one of the top 5 offensive linemen in the NFL. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer, and that's Trent Williams. I couldn't put him top 3 just because he's past his prime, and the 3 that are ahead of him are just they touch the ball so much more but you don't want Trent Williams touching the ball. And so I couldn't find it to put him higher. And the Chiefs on the opposite end, they don't have a Nick Bosa, right? So Williams is really important, but in this game, his importance is not necessarily the blind side and, oh my God, he's got to handle Frank Clark in his prime like it was 4 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little different that way. There's nothing more for me to say. Trent Williams is a stud. He's a freak. And if you don't think he's an absolute game changer on a roster, I don't think I can help you. One of the biggest differences, I've been doing a lot of research about some for this trivia we're going to do, but others just for preparation for my own show and for next week when we really preview the game. You go look back at that Super Bowl 54 31-20 win over Chiefs over the Niners. One of the biggest glaring additions for this Niners team is Trent Williams. That is how much better this offense. You just saying you added Trent Williams, the offense is so much better than it was that 2020 game. And I think it's going to make a big difference in this game.
At 4 for me is Christian McCaffrey, and he's the only one that is an MVP finalist, and for him to be at 4 might seem like a shock. And it's hard when we get into the top 5 here. He's incredible. He's one of those Swiss Army knives that we've talked about, his ability to work in a lot of different aspects of this offense, and obviously can break things wide open. Has been a huge addition to the 49ers. I mean, you want to talk about big additions since their last Super Bowl. Trent Williams is at the top, and Christian McCaffrey, right after that. I mean, that's what a fit, and what a great way to showcase how team building matters. And he commanded a lot of money, and they were willing to pony up because of what he brings to this team, and it's obviously been a huge year for him. Just the ability to be a guy that you can rely on every single down, because he'll be that check down for you. Yeah. Brock Purdy has been bailed out by him many, many times. And yeah, there's not much to say. It's just, really what it boiled down to is the rest of the guys on the list are bona fide first ballot Hall of Famers. Christian McCaffrey is probably a Hall of Famer, but maybe not first ballot yet. And so really comes down to that for me. But not much surprise there. That he's at least in the top 5, but 4 was a little tough to put him there. Yeah,
I think I'll just move on to 3 because I'll respond to that when I get to McCaffrey. I'm going with Kelsey at 3. Kelsey for me comes in at 3 because it is to me a little obvious he's lost a step at this point in time. He is still an all-timer. I don't know how you make the argument he's not a top 3 tight end of all time. I think there's tight end's one of those positions where I think you can legit make an argument for 2 or 3 guys to be like, they're the number 1 tight end of all time. He's in that category and he's in that group. If you want to put him number 1, I'm not going to fight you too hard on it. I think for me, what will be really impressive to watch, Kelsey's going to be really impressive to watch because he's always fun to watch. But this is the first Super Bowl that I would honestly say you can make the argument the player with the most pressure on them is not a quarterback. It's a tight end. It's Travis Kelce. And not because of the actual just game planning. The game plan is really important, right? He is the catalyst for the Kansas City Chief offense. Even last year's Super Bowl, you had Juju Smith-Schuster. You know what I mean? There was wide receiver weapons that you could, rely on a little bit more. Kelsey was a year younger. But this year, I mean, he is 1A when it comes to the weapons. And when you look back at the 20, yeah, so that's pressure, right?
Yeah. And
then you add on top of it, in a game last year in the Super Bowl, I couldn't tell you if Travis Kelce had a penalty because he was getting chippy, a taunting. I couldn't tell you if Travis Kelce took his helmet off and was swearing at someone. I don't remember. But in the game, I'll tell you last year, if that happened, I would have been like, fuck yeah, I love Travis Kelce. I love the passion. He's my guy. It's not crazy to say this year, I really hope someone has gotten in his ear, his management, his agent, someone has been like, Travis, you can't, like, I don't care if they mug you, whatever. Like, if there's any bad press of like, oh my God, look at what did you see what he mouthed to that player? He taunted, he did this. There are so many more eyes on him for such different reasons. That is an insane amount of pressure he has to go, he's bringing into, also while being the number one option for the greatest quarterback on the planet and and for an offense that needs to put up points against an extremely good defense. So a lot of pressure for Kelce. He's fantastic. If there's anyone who can handle it, it's him. And I think there is. I just hope that someone is going to remind him that, dude, there are a lot of people watching for a lot of different reasons this year compared to any other Super Bowl. And don't let the story be Monday on the Today Show and Good Morning America that everyone's talking about. Oh my God, Kelce's taunting penalty, or oh my God, Kelce mouthed this, or he punched this guy, or because they're going to try to get under skin. San Francisco is one thing that, if you really watch San Francisco, they're a nasty team. Like they
instigate.
They're an instigative team, and Shanahan is okay with that. Kyle Shanahan's one of those guys. He'll say shit. He'll talk trash. Like they're not afraid to back it up and be physical and you know what happens between the lines. There's going to be a lot of guys saying a lot of shit, and so I wanted to put that in there with my Travis Kelce. I don't need to convince you he's the greatest. He's a great player. He belongs in the top 3. So you know what I mean. It's not worth it. I do think that's an underrated storyline heading into the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I'm interested to see it, what that pressure indicates for him as well, in terms of, if they win, is he considering riding off in the sunset and retiring? I don't know. If they lose, is he like starting to get fatigued by this thing and not sure if he's trying to see maybe like a bump in the road up ahead and not wanting to, I don't know. I mean, he is in his mid-30s and there hasn't been any rumors, but it's just something that maybe that is, so maybe he's got pressure on himself internally about, got to get this Super Bowl, especially, they talked about being even more hungry after last year. So yeah, that's interesting. He's my number 3 too. And yeah, he is the guy that probably is the best reader of a defense for a non-quarterback in this game. And so, yeah, it's gonna be a battle with him and Fred Warner and him and just that middle level of the San Francisco defense, kind of trying to see who can outsmart the other. And Travis Kelce tends to win those battles more often than not. But you're right. I mean, I'm not sure if I would say he's a catalyst for the offense, but he definitely is a catalyst for the passing game. But I do think that Pacheco being so important to what this team does this year, he would probably, for me, be the tone setter, if you will, that is required for Kansas City, outside of course, Patrick Mahomes. If he throws a couple picks early, that's brutal. But yeah, no, Travis Kelce is my number 3, so we are in agreement there.
Yeah,
so
number 2,
for 2, then I'm gonna guess you got Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, Christian McCaffrey's at 2, and I put him at 2 because I really do believe he is the reason why people doubt Brock Purdy so much. Like if they just had an average pedestrian running back, then you really say, and Purdy was still doing what he was doing, no one would doubt Brock Purdy. But McCaffrey's so good, so special, so unique, that he's the one that brings the doubt into Brock Purdy. Honestly, the best thing that could happen to Brock Purdy would be Christian McCaffrey sprains his ankle on first carry, is a non-factor, and Purdy goes out there and lights it up and wins the Super Bowl throwing 3 touchdowns, 300 yards. And it's like, oh my God, he did it without Christian McCaffrey. There'd never be a doubt on Purdy again if he could do it. I don't hope that happens. Knock on wood. I'm not saying I'm not saying I want that.
You could just have McCaffrey have 50 scrimmage yards and like 2 catches and no touchdowns.
No, because I'd still argue, the threat of McCaffrey. I mean, he is out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but people have short memories.
Yeah, McCaffrey's a stud. He's a freak, and he's the best running back in the NFL right now, and he is the best just overall weapon in my opinion in the NFL. If he wanted to be a slot receiver and you only put him at slot receiver, he'd be probably the best slot receiver in the NFL. He is the best running back. He's so unique, and so he's at number 2 for me. And
Yeah,
he's
number
in
2
his
is
prime. I think that's part of it for me too right
yeah,
now. Like,
that's fair, that's
he
fair,
is
yeah.
living right now in his prime the same way that our number one for both of us is.
Yeah, Trent Williams is number 2 for me,
That's
and
fair.
part of it is because he's, in my view, the greatest left tackle of all time. And then, on top of that, I don't, maybe he's outside of his prime, but he hasn't really had much of a before prime, after prime. His
Yeah.
his whole career
He's just
has
been
just been
dominant.
prime. He's so freaking good, and he's still so incredibly fast for a 340-pound guy.
Freak.
He's unbelievably athletic and talented, and yeah, I just and with yeah, I mean, you're right, in terms of them needing him as much in this game as maybe they would if they're facing a premier outside edge rusher or defensive end. It'd be a little bit different in terms of the level of need, but he's still super dominant. So yeah, I mean, you could go a lot of different ways. It just, for me, Trent Williams fell in number 2 just because he's the greatest of all time at his position, in my view, and that made it easy to put there. And then we get to our number 1 guy, Patrick Mahomes, who's also potentially the greatest quarterback of all time. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Mahomes, I mean, we don't need to say that. We all knew what was happening here. He was going to be number 1. And he is what I would just say the difference between the 2020 Super Bowl when the Chiefs won 31-20 over the Niners versus this one. Mahomes was not a first ballot Hall of Famer. Mahomes was this
yeah,
MVP 2019 season, second year in the league, absolute rocket ship. And he was fun to watch. He was Aaron Rodgers. We were like, oh my God, we have the new Aaron Rodgers, the most talented guy ever. What's crazy is here we are now 4 years later, and we say now we have the new Brady. So he is, I think to me, one of the things that's really special about him was you look back on it and you say, they won 31-20. He had 2 fumbles and 2 interceptions. Now they recovered, I think, both of the fumbles. But if I were to tell you that Patrick Mahomes is going to have 2 interceptions and 2 fumbles in this Super Bowl, you'd be like, that's devastating.
yeah, I would pick them to lose.
And so, and you would never think he would do that. But he was that's how good that Niners defense was. And I will say my favorite thing about looking forward to this matchup as we transition into trivia is that, yes, the Niners have Brock Purdy and some different faces, right? And they feel young because of Brock Purdy. These are 2 rosters that, I mean, do you talk about experience? Like, there's no doubt. I mean, even with Brock Purdy, he prepared and played in an NFC Championship game last year. He prepared and played in an NFC Championship game this year. And this Niners team has been in 3 of the last 5 NFC Championship games and a Super Bowl, 2 of the last 5 Super Bowls with the same coach. Like, we, for the first time in a long time, have like okay. There's no question or worry or doubt about will these teams be prepared or is the moment too big? Purdy's the only one you have to really ask, is the moment too big? And he just missed out on my top 10. I had him at about 12, 11, 12. You can make the argument. Joe Tooney would have been my number 11, the guard for the Chiefs.
Okay.
So then Brock would have been right around there, 12, 13.
I struggled. Joe Tooney was in there for me as well, but I struggled with L'Jarius Sneed, the season he's had.
He's great.
Him and Trent McDuffie together I was struggling where to put them, and Willie Gay too. A lot of Chiefs defensive players that
They start showing up in those teams, yeah.
Yeah. So like those were the ones I struggled the most with in terms of finding a spot there. But yeah, Joe Tooney is an incredible lineman.
And he should be
well,
healthy for the game next week.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, if Nick Bolton wasn't injured, he would have been right there too for the Chiefs. So, especially a guy that made some big plays last year to win them the Super Bowl. So yeah, let's transition into Super Bowl trivia. Mark, we kind of just gave ourselves an open slate to pick 5 Super Bowl trivia questions for the other. This can be regarding any topic related to Super Bowl trivia. So I'm excited to see what you got, and we can go back and forth with our trivia questions. So I'll toss it to you for the first one.
The New England Patriots are tied with which team with the most Super Bowl losses with 5 each?
Oh, the most Super Bowl losses. That's interesting. I mean, my initial reaction is Dallas because they lost to Pittsburgh twice. Um, but I don't think they got there 5 other times and lost. Who got to a Super Bowl? The Vikings got to. You said they're tied with the Patriots with 5
Five
losses?
losses. Five losses.
Yeah, the
They
Bills
have
have
won.
4
I will say
losses.
this is a team that has won at least one Super Bowl. I'm not going to give you how many they've won.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Denver's lost. Denver's lost several. Washington's lost a couple. I that's a hard one. The Raiders have lost. S I'm gonna go Raiders, actually. I'm gonna go with Raiders.
You had it. Denver.
Darn
Denver's
it,
lost five.
Denver. Yeah,
Remember,
that was my
this
dang.
one's for John. He
Yeah,
lost what,
yeah.
3 himself before,
Yeah,
and then
I think he lost 2, but yeah.
Peyton lost 1 with the Broncos. Yeah. Sorry, so that was my first
But
one.
that's a lot, though. That's a lot of Super Bowl losses. I didn't
Hit
think
it.
Denver had that many. Good lord. That's rough. Alright, so for mine, my first one, I was hoping to find it's a very, like, specific stat I was looking for, but couldn't find,
Okay.
the archives to do it, and we don't pay for any service to, like, be able to do it ourselves, but Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey both, received MVP votes, so they're finalists for the league MVP
Oh,
award.
yeah. Okay.
I was hoping to say, how many Super Bowls have featured 2 MVP finalists in them? But I couldn't find that. However, I could find this. Can you guess how many times the MVP and the MVP runner-up faced against each other in the Super Bowl? So how many occurrences did the MVP.
MVPs don't often make Super Bowls. That's one of those
No, that they
underrated
don't.
stats.
And they often lose Super Bowls when they do get there. I believe Patrick
So
Mahomes kind of bucked that trend last year, actually.
if you're the MVP and you're the MVP runner up, you're usually just like the stud on like a pretty good team, but there's a reason why you're the MVP.
And these two teams faced each other, so it
So
wasn't the MVP and the
I'm gonna say
runner-up on the
about
same team.
I'm gonna say 6 times.
6 times. It has happened 4 times.
Oh, okay.
Matt Ryan over Tom Brady in 2016. Peyton over Drew Brees in 2009.
Okay.
Ken Anderson had the MVP over Joe Montana back in 81. And most recently, last year, when Mahomes won it, taking on runner-up Jalen Hurts in the Super Bowl. So it's happened 4 times in Super Bowl history. So nearly 60 years, only 4 times.
That's crazy.
It is
All
kind of
right.
wild.
Which city has hosted the most Super Bowls with the number being 11?
I think I know this one. It's a warm weather city. It's not a dome. So it's it's Miami then. It's got to be Miami.
It is Miami.
Miami's close to the most, yeah.
New Orleans is 10, but New Orleans is getting to Super Bowl again, I think next year. I think we're going back to New Orleans soon, so they'll tie Miami for that.
Yeah, it is
that
New
record
Orleans
11.
next year. You're
Yeah.
right.
There's 11.
I would predict in the next 15 to 20 years, Vegas is going to be the clear leader in that category.
Vegas and LA,
right?
the SoFi
Yeah,
and
true.
Vegas,
Yeah.
they're going to get it. They're going to be in a rotation of getting it. And Miami, honestly, I'd be okay with a Super Bowl bouncing between Dallas, Miami, Vegas, and LA, and just keeping in those 4 cities.
Yeah, yeah. I know that they want to get away from any potential outdoor elements. But I mean, Miami is cool, and I just remember the Miami Super Bowl with Bears Colts and how rainy it was, and
pouring.
that was the death for Rex
An offense
Grossman
that
and
couldn't
Spencer
throw the ball
Benson.
anyways.
Like,
Yeah.
like an offense that also fumbled the snap like 6 times throughout
I
that
know,
year,
try,
right?
that's terrible.
It's Butterfingers.
It's brutal.
All right. Only 3 players in NFL history have won multiple NFL and Super Bowl MVPs. Can you name them? So I'll repeat it.
In the
Only
same
3
year?
players. No, just in general. Only 3 players have to their name multiple NFL MVPs
So
and
multiple.
multiple Super Bowl MVPs as well.
So Mahomes
Mahomes is 1. That is correct.
Brady has to be on there now.
Yep. And then you're
Manning
just missing one person.
Manning only has one Super Bowl MVP, but you said multiple MVPs and a Super Bowl MVP. It was
No,
multiple,
multiple for both.
both.
Multiple for
So
both.
Manning's out.
The third one's tough because like Mahomes and Brady, you're like, yeah. I mean, those guys. The
Well,
third one
Montana. I'm
makes
trying to find
definite
people
sense.
who've won a lot of Super Bowls. Montana, did he win a lot of MVPs? I don't know if he won 2 MVPs. Montana.
It is Montana. It's Joe
Okay.
Montana's the third guy. Yep.
All right, cool.
Yeah, if you think about it, it does make sense. Terry Bradshaw was first in my mind, but Lynn Swan won it the one year, and so yeah, I think Terry's got 2 and only 1 MVP, something like that. But yeah,
The longest national anthem was in Super Bowl 38. This was it was clocked in at 2 minutes and 35 seconds, performed by this female artist who's very, very good on the piano.
38 would have been.
It's coming up in 10 years.
2004.
No, wait, 48. 48. XL.
40.
XL.
Oh, okay.
48.
So 10 years
10
ago.
years ago.
Who was big like a decade ago?
And I will say she was not like old and she's still in her prime, you could argue.
I feel like I have seen this before.
And this woman was playing the piano while she sang it. So she's a real artist.
Is it Avril Lavigne? I wasn't sure if she played the piano or not.
Alicia Keys. This girl is on fire.
Yeah, she has piano keys.
Reba is this year, and Reba's the average national anthem is 150, and we have Reba's national anthem. We play it every morning on Kick FM, my radio station I host my show on.
Oh, and, okay. All right. So inside info because the prop bets are coming out soon.
Yeah, Reba's on the one that we have recorded was live at I don't remember at what, but hers floats around like 130. So you should hammer the under on Reba.
Yeah, because usually it's like 140, 135, 145, somewhere in that ballpark for the over under. That's interesting. Yeah, dude, my pop culture sucks. I have no idea who artists are.
Go ahead.
So that one got me good. Where did my list go? Hold on. I think I lost it. I'm pulling it back up. There we go. All right. This is very interesting. So they took the compilation of all of the final scores in Super Bowl history and put them all together and then calculated the average. What is the average? Not meaning the median. So it's not what score occurred the most. This is just what is the average score when you combine all of the winning scores and all of the losing scores and then pull the average. Just in Super Bowls. And it's a bigger disparity than you think. It's a larger gap because there have been a couple,
blowouts. Bears
blowout games.
Helped out that. The Seahawks helped with that. I'm going to say 29-20.
You're pretty close. It's 30-16.
Okay.
So a 14-point gap between that. Yeah, that's the average final score in the Super Bowl. That was interesting. That's a 2-touchdown spread. So there definitely are some outliers in there that really push the curve.
Okay, so my final 2 they're actually based on the 2020 Super Bowl Chiefs-Niners. You ready for this?
Okay.
Who was the second leading receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs in their 31-20 win with 5 receptions and 98 yards?
So was the leading receiver was Kelsey?
I'm not going to answer that. Who is the second leading receiver
with 5 catches and 90 what yards?
98 yards.
I would have just assumed that Kelsey was number 1, but maybe he's not.
Remember who else was on that team? 2020.
Oh, Tyreek Hill was on the team.
So who was the second leading receiver with 5 catches, 98 yards?
It's not going to be one of those guys. I guarantee it's not. It's going to be one of those like random. You know what? Jerick McKinnon. I'm going Jerick McKinnon.
That's fun. That's a good guess. It's Sammy Watkins. Remember him?
Oh my gosh. I would have never thought it was Sammy Watkins.
Tyreek Hill had 9 catches, 105 yards. Sammy Watkins had 5 catches, 98 yards. Kelsey, I think I didn't write it down, but he had something like 50 yards and maybe a touchdown. But this Chiefs offense used to be wide receiver. It was a wide receiver offense, and Kelsey just fed in the middle because he was the security blanket in the middle because you had to watch the outside with Hill and Watkins.
That's interesting. That is interesting. How much does the Lombardi Trophy weigh?
Oh, I know. It's surprisingly heavy. It's like 16 pounds.
Yeah, I was surprised by the number. Is 16 pounds your final guess? 7. It's only 7.
I thought it was heavy.
I was actually, so did I. I was actually surprised that it's
no wonder Brady threw it in the boat across.
And no wonder Blanca dented it so easily with just a bunt. All right, let's get the final one underway.
For my final one, with 17 carries, 104 yards rushing, and a touchdown, who was the leading rusher for the Chiefs in the 2020 Super Bowl? 17 carries, 104 yards, and a touchdown. Who told you the Chiefs couldn't run the ball?
Yeah, well, I feel like that was the last year for Damian Williams. I'm going to go Damian Williams.
Playoff Damian. Remember him? So that's a funny thing. When you look back at it, you think, oh, my God, that's when that offense was so high-flying, blah, 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 blah. That Chiefs team ran the ball really well during that playoff run.
They were just efficient.
Because everyone's saying, oh, the Chiefs offense might actually be better than it was in 2020 because of Pacheco. This team ran the football. Yeah, since then, the Clyde Edwards-Helaire years, they haven't been as good of a running team in the playoffs. Pacheco's brought them back the last 2 years. But Damian Williams was great in that playoff run, including in the Super Bowl.
He gave them a lot in terms of the flexibility they had. All right, my final one. Maybe this is easy, maybe it's not. I didn't remember this, so I'm hoping this will be a little tricky for you. Who caught Tom Brady's final Super Bowl touchdown? So his last ever touchdown pass in the Super Bowl. Bonus points if you could tell me when which half it occurred.
It would have been with Tampa, right? He would have thrown one with Tampa.
It was with Tampa.
It'd be too easy if it was Gronk. Mike Evans, too easy. Maybe Chris Godwin. Who was that white guy? Scotty Miller?
Scotty doesn't know.
I'll go with, actually, it was probably Leonard Fournette out of the backfield.
It was not. It occurred in the first half, so he didn't throw one in the second half against the Chiefs. He threw a touchdown pass in the red zone, his third passing touchdown of the first half. This one put the Bucs up 21-6, and it was to Antonio Brown. Who had like a short hitch in the middle of the end zone, and
they ran the ball in the second half. They dominated that game because the Chiefs had no tackles.
I believe Mike Evans caught Brady's final touchdown, period. I believe he was the final touchdown, but final Super Bowl touchdown belonged to Antonio Brown. So that was fun. Always good to get a little trivia going in here. But yeah, next week, we're obviously going to have a couple episodes coming back for you all. So we'll have one, focused maybe on some fun prop bets and some other things regarding this matchup. But then, of course, late next week, we'll give you our full preview episode of the Super Bowl matchup, our thoughts on who wins, final score, and how this one plays out. So very much looking forward to that. But we appreciate you listening. This is the Football Lounge with Mark and Dan, brought to you by the For Frequency's Sake Podcast Network.